Back in November, something really bad happened.
And we're finally ready to talk about it.
Good, noise signal?
Yeah.
Go, 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 go!
This is the story of Our Runaway Diesel. After a lovely stay at the Monterey Bay Yacht Club, we were ready to sail south again. So we turned on the engine, cast off the lines, and made our way out to sea. And that is when things started to go horribly wrong.
Right out of the harbor, the engine revved up loud and quick, but since it resolved itself, we figured that there was no issue and chalked it up to some kelp around the prop.
Okay, sorting itself out.
We were very wrong. Moments later, Chris was about to raise the mainsail and the engine continued to rev louder than ever before, so he ran back to the cockpit, told me to turn the engine off, but when I did, it was unresponsive. So we simultaneously understood the direness of the situation, and he dashed below deck, threw open the floorboards, and revealed our very pissed off engine. I stayed at the helm, keeping us on course, while Chris managed to shut off the engine.
The first thing I checked when I got down to the engine was the high pressure fuel pump. On top of the pump is a little lever which actuates the stop solenoid, and sometimes the panel doesn't respond to the engine. So I went down there and manually manipulated the stop solenoid and nothing happened. So at that moment I knew for sure that this was a runaway, and the only next step to stop the engine was to starve it of oxygen.
So after moments that felt like a lifetime, Chris was able to silence the engine by taking his hand and throwing it over the air intake.
Can't recommend that.
In retrospect, that is definitely not the right thing to do, because in those runaway situations, there's a lot that can go wrong and you could cause a lot of bodily harm. Luckily, Chris is still here with us. Please learn from our experience and do not do that. Use a rag, use a book, use anything you can. Don't use your body. With our floorboards tossed aside and the engine finally quiet, Chris was able to really assess the situation and make an action plan of what to do next. So naturally, he called his big brother John and ran him through the situation.
Can you talk for a second?
Sure, oh, it's for you.
Hey, I have a really bad thing that just happened. Our engine just ran away. I got to it before anything f***ing blew up. I don't know if it's, do I need to like flush the engine, like the fluids out to...
The engine is leaking oil somehow into the intake, and it starts running off of the oil off the crankcase. And that's, you know, then it's a unmitigated amount of fuel going into
There's a
intake.
load of oil in the intake.
Just drain some oil out of there, get it back on its right lines, and then start her back up with a rag ready.
Yeah.
Because she's probably gonna run a little fast at first.
Yeah.
And hopefully she then
Cools off.
Comes back down to reality.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Thanks.
Bye.
Chris was able to conclude that the oil in the engine was much too high, so when we listed over, it spilled over the pistons, bringing the oil up into the intake manifold. At this point, the oil wasn't just oil anymore either. It was mixed with diesel, which is the perfect recipe for a runaway.
If you own a boat with a diesel engine, you absolutely need to know that this could happen to you. Essentially, a runaway diesel is exactly what it sounds like, a motor that just won't stop, resulting in a cascade of problems, including bodily injury, damage to the motor, or even worse, damage to the boat. Unfortunately, there are many factors that can lead to a runaway diesel, such as an oil seal failure in a turbocharged engine, overfilling the crankcase, broken/damaged fuel pipes, incorrectly assembled fuel linkages, or in our case, the failure of the injection fuel pump.
The injection fuel pump supplies the injectors with fuel in the proper sequence. In our case, with the Perkins 4108, when the pump fails, it allows diesel to flow unregulated into the crankcase. When the fluid inside the engine reaches a point where it spills into the intake manifold, the engine will burn its own oil/diesel inside the sump, leading to the engine becoming the victim of a feedback loop that can't easily be stopped, which can lead to further mechanical failure due to overspeed, oil starvation, or fire, none of which are ideal on a sailboat.
After some research, we discovered really quickly that we were not the only 418 owners to have a runaway happen to them. And in fact, most of the people who have had runaways with their 418s have either just replaced or haven't replaced their injection fuel pump. Come to find out, this injection fuel pump is very notorious for having these 418s run away due to an overfilling of the crankcase with diesel.
Once we narrowed down our problem, we knew that we had some work ahead of us. But the injector fuel pump is known to be Pandora's box of engine parts, so instead of DIYing it like we normally would, we did a little more research and concluded that it was probably best to send it off to a professional. But we still had to get ourselves all the way to our next port of call.
With the boat on course and Marissa at the helm, I grabbed our oil siphon and began to remove about a gallon of oil mixed diesel out of the engine, returning the level back to normal on the dipstick. Then, I carefully inspected the block and the sump beneath the engine to ensure that no rods were thrown or any other damages were apparent. Luckily, I caught the engine just in time before any further damages could occur. In the span of 30 minutes, I got our Perkins operational enough to get us to our next port of call,
where we could really rip into the project.
Fortunately, the forecast showed nothing but wind all night long, so we knew we could get to our next port of call without using the engine.
To add insult to injury, it was one of the roughest night passages we have ever had, with extremely high winds and 8 to 12 foot swell. Avocet turned into a sled, charging down the waves at a top hole speed of 12.9 knots. In any other circumstance, we probably would have thought it was fun, but we had a lot on our minds, and our biggest focus was just getting to Morro Bay safe and sound.
All right, well, it is the day before Thanksgiving, Wednesday, end of the day. We are just now getting very close to Morro Bay. The rock is right behind me. We got probably 20 more minutes. Didn't film anything last night just because rounding Point Sur was quite the feat. Usually whenever you round a point or a cape, you can double it. That's kind of a good status quo, and that was definitely what we had last night. So we actually had about sustained 25 gusting into 30s from I want to say 8:30 to 4 in the morning today. So it was a really long night of going very fast. We were averaging 8.5, 9 knots all night long. So the boat was just a freaking sled. And that was just with one sail out. I just had our Geno out. I took the main down. I didn't sleep much. Marissa didn't really either. We were just going so fast. The boat was just very loud. Our prop was spinning aggressively, and the boat was just making an obscene amount of noise, just barreling through the water. I enjoyed surfing down all the waves, and that was awesome. But I am glad to chill out because I didn't get much sleep last night. So that's enough of my rambling. Tell I'm tired. We're about to go through the breakwater of Morro Bay, get a spot to anchor, and get some food and go to bed.
Hesitantly, we started up the engine, listening intently for any sudden changes, waiting to spring into action if need be. Luckily, all was well, and we limped into the anchorage safely, setting our hook and settling into our new workspace.
There's a couple things we want to mention regarding the aftermath of a runaway diesel. After a runaway, you should be wary of running an engine that contains diesel mixed with oil. Not only does this cause runaways, but it also breaks down the viscosity of the oil, which can be damaging to not only the bearings and pistons, but also to the seals inside the engine. The biggest issue we had due to diesel sitting inside the sump for a long period of time is that the rear main seal, which keeps oil from leaking out the back of the crankshaft, had deteriorated to the point where we had a substantial leak that we needed to address in the near future. So be aware that any plastics or rubber inside of a motor can be damaged by the presence of diesel.
Another issue is that diesel engines are not meant to be ran at an RPM associated with a runaway. Because of this excessive exertion, the rings on the pistons can wear down the cylinder walls quickly without sufficient oil. So if you are hopefully able to stop the engine before anything catastrophic happens, it's a good idea to do a compression test before making the decision between repowering or rebuilding. Since we had good compression at an average of 400 psi, we decided that the engine was worth rebuilding.
The last thing to note is that when oil is being burned instead of diesel, oil goes throughout the entire engine system. Since oil is very dirty when it's being burned as fuel, there's a good chance that your injectors will foul up and a thick layer of oil and sludge will line your entire exhaust system. Not only will this not burn off by itself, but it lines your system with oil, creating an eco nightmare. Fortunately for us, our exhaust system is able to be taken apart and cleaned, which we painstakingly took apart every single piece and cleaned it all just so we didn't pollute any of our oceans.
Not all engines are the same. They all have their own quirks, just like the boats they serve. Our Perkins 4108 is strong, but not immune to her own set of oddities. Through our research, we have concluded that 2 of the most frequently reported causes of a Perkins runaway is due to either the lift pump or the high-pressure fuel pump. So if you are a Perkins owner, this may be a sign to check on your systems accordingly. Although runaway diesels are a statistically rare occurrence, it's important to understand how to fix it when it happens.
After all, we didn't think it could happen to us, and we were terribly surprised when it did. That being said, we did know what it was when it was happening, and we knew how to stop it, which saved our engine and saved our cruising season.
Our time in Morro Bay would last a lot longer than anticipated due to engine work, California's historic foul weather, and the holidays falling smack dab in the middle of it all. Despite the challenges that lay ahead and the integrity of our cruising life, we were grateful to have the resources to get the job done and get back on our way.
If you follow us on Instagram and read our blog posts, you already know how the story ends.
But if you're waiting for the next video, then buckle up because shit's about to get real. And all of that is next on Sailing Avocet.